First of all, I want to say that it is crazy that this movie exists at all. As a kid who grew up in the 90s watching cartoons and then playing video games and then watching movies and reading comics and stuff like that, the fact that we have a movie about Black Adam that is not only a big studio movie, but is expected to be one of the highest grossing movies of the year is insane. And I'm not sure if The Rock is actually a huge fan of Black Adam, or at some point he was like, hey, I kind of look like this guy, I can be in a movie about this guy. But either way, I'm sure he appreciates the character, and no one has done more to take one single character and turn it into a mainstream entertainment extravaganza. It is incredible. Now, I've watched a lot of interviews with The Rock because I find it fascinating to watch him say the same thing over and over and over and over again. Talk about how he's the most powerful person on our planet, but not the most powerful person in the universe, and talking about how they made this movie for the fans. They listened to the fans, got what the fans wanted. And I think that is very true. This movie is for the fans. What I mean is, if you are a fan of The Rock, or Black Adam, or maybe some of the rest of these guys, or the idea of the DCEU, you're probably gonna like this movie. If you are not, I don't know how much there is for you. If you've seen the trailers for this movie, which have been playing for the last, 3 years, you pretty much know what it is. You know which characters are in it, you can kind of tell what the action set pieces are. And having seen the trailers, there's some information that the movie hides for a while that I'm like, that was in like the first trailer, so that probably shouldn't have been in there. And I'm not gonna spoil anything, but like, the movie's what you expect. But it's also two movies. Because partially it's this movie that Dwayne Johnson has been describing for a very long time. It's almost like a monster movie. He's dangerous, he's unstoppable, he kills, and he's a force of nature. JSA has to come stop him. And there's even a scene where he's kind of slowly exiting the cave or tomb or whatever this is. And I was like, oh, this is something. It's like a monster movie. He's just an unstoppable, like a super powered Michael Myers. And sure, maybe there's a little bit more to him than that, but just in general, that as the premise for a movie like this could totally work. However, there is another part of this movie that I don't want to go into too much detail on because it's not in that many of the trailers. And I think that's intentional because I think that really undercuts all this other stuff. The action is sort of fun. The parts where Black Adam's killing guys are good. Mostly, some of it's a little bouncy and kind of rubbery, but for the most part, it works, looks nice. Things explode and there's lightning and stuff. That's cool. A lot of the action is very close. Like there's a lot of shots where Black Adam and Hawkman are fighting where the camera's like on one of their shoulders, and I don't think that works super well. There's also way too much slow motion. And not to say you can't do slow motion, to his eternal credit, I think Zack Snyder, for the most part, used slow motion well. Movies like 300, it was used to accentuate the action, and you get a really cool move where I picked up a dude with the sword and slammed him into the ground, so we'd slow down just for that, so we can enjoy that. But there's so much slow motion in this movie that just feels like posing for, like a trading card or something, like a poster. Like there's probably gonna be a lot of good thumbnails that come out of that, but it just felt very indulgent. Story-wise, I don't think it goes quite far enough with Black Adam. I think it suffers from the Fast and Furious problem, which is the idea that the main characters can never lose a fight because it would make them look less cool. So every fight has to end with them all being pulled away from each other, or even really small things. I've heard that someone has an assistant and that assistant's job is to just count how many times the characters punch each other to make sure that that character punches the same amount as that character, because they have to have equal punches because they're both very cool. And if one had more punches than the other, that guy would be cooler, and they can't have that. Very controlled image. I feel like this movie, because The Rock is clearly so involved creatively in the movie and in just the entire DCEU at this point, feels like it suffers from the Fast and Furious problem. And not because The Rock never loses fights, but because Black Adam is never bad or wrong. Everybody he kills is bad. Like maybe a more effective version of this movie would involve the Justice Society sending out like a first wave of guys with Our Man and Citizen Steel, and they just all get killed by Black Adam because Black Adam's like, well, the other guys were shooting at me and I killed them because they were bad guys, and these guys came and started shooting me and I killed them because they're bad guys. But like, this version of Black Adam couldn't do that because he only kills bad guys. So a version of this movie where Black Adam is a worse guy would be way more interesting, but he can't be because he's played by a humongous megastar with a very controlled image, and that's sort of a problem. All that being said, I think The Rock's pretty good in this movie. I would say the vibe he's going for is kind of Terminator, like more personality, not quite as robotic, but that same kind of attitude and toughness, and I think that more or less works. I'd be curious to hear from Egyptian people how they feel about The Rock being in this role, because that part of it feels interesting, but I don't think this movie gets made with anyone but The Rock at the center of it, so it's kind of like, is that a sacrifice you're willing to make? I don't know. The JSA is, fine. I think Hawkman's okay. The helmet's way too big. I was not in love with this version of the character. Like, I didn't have strong feelings about it one way or the other. I think Dr. Fate was pretty cool. Pierce Brosnan is perfect casting for that role. I think he did a lot of magic. A lot of it was what you'd expect, shields, teleporting, stuff like that. But sometimes they got a little creative with it. It did seem like he had maybe 3 moves that were his go-tos during fights. Maybe wish they had done a little bit more with that. Kind of like Doctor Strange in Multiverse of Madness, where he's just pulling crazy spells out of nowhere. But I think the vibe of Dr. Fate was very good, and I think he looked awesome. Atom Smasher and Cyclone looked interesting. Besides that, had pretty much nothing going on. And the villain was obviously dumb, because of course it is. There is a post-credit scene that is fine. I think it would have been cool maybe if I hadn't heard about it for the last month and a half, but it was okay. I think its biggest problem is that it feels like it's teasing a better movie that maybe should have been where this one started. But to me, this does feel like the only Black Adam movie we could possibly get. They couldn't make one where the character was more flawed, more beatable, because The Rock wouldn't make that movie. And if The Rock isn't making this movie, there's no way DC is just out of the blue making a Black Adam movie. So overall, I don't think it's the best DC movie, but it's definitely not the worst. It's pretty much what you expect.